up until now, you've really been focusing on retention and recovering back to the point where you're kind of framing your opponent away, and maybe that's the point where you get feet on the biceps, or you've pushed them away to the point where they can't, where they're kind of disengaged. But we haven't really then gone on the offense. So it's a really good way to train your guard retention, but it's actually a terrible way to roll in general, because if that's how you roll, then you're kind of always on the defense. And I actually find, when I'm working my guard retention in that fashion, I often get put in a lot worse spots than if I'm playing a very offensive game. And that's what we want you to now. Like, it's really important to work that style of guard retention when you are on the defense. But then this next chapter is now about how do we turn our defense to offense. So when we get our feet on the biceps, or when we start to recover, how can we tie our opponent up and make it so they can't pass us? How do we approach someone from an uninitiated position where you've got no grips achieved yet? So you've got an opponent in front of you, you're in guard. What are we looking for to establish good control? And we'll also go through, in a little bit later section, some attacks you can go. Like, so as you're retaining guard, thinking not just to come back and try to tie them, not just to recover, not just to tie them up, but how can we actually get into really good positioning? For example, some submissions and some controls within that. But that's different. Like, some of the sections we did cover that already. So obviously with reverse De La Riva, we covered quite a few attacks to get into good positioning, and from some of the double underhooks position as well. But there's some others that kind of transcend beyond that. So we'll have a look at that. We're now talking about what to do when you get your feet on the biceps, or you've pummeled your foot underneath the armpit. Like, what are our options from there? So most of our recoveries that we've covered in this whole instructional, we kind of got back to the point where our feet are in front of the biceps, but we might not necessarily have good control of our opponent yet. So now how do we, from that position, establish good control? And we'll cover what to do in gi and in no gi.
From the foot and biceps position, we're going to be looking at the best ways to establish control. Now, because I just have foot in the biceps, I have a solid pushing, framing position here, but I don't have anything to stop my opponent from backing away. So I have nothing pulling my opponent towards me. So I want to establish some kind of grip that's going to allow me to do that. Now, we're going to solely look at whatever part of our opponent is closest to us is going to be the first grip that we're going to make. So if Lockie's upper body is really close to me, I'm definitely going to be attaching towards one of the collars. And from here, now we can start to look at a collar sleeve, outside De La Riva, K-guard, any kind of guard from there. If Lockie's upper body is a bit further away, but he still has his hands quite connected to my shins, I might start to look at taking a sleeve grip. I can go double sleeve or a 2-on-1 and start to pull my opponent in from here. If he's not giving me the sleeves or the upper body, so not giving me the collars, but he's giving me the legs, then I'm going to look at attaching to the lower body, say an outside De La Riva or hug his leg. In summary, when our feet are on the biceps, we want to look at creating some kind of grip that's going to allow us to pull our opponent towards us. So we want to grab the closest available grip. So if my opponent's chest is close to me, I can look at attaching to one of the collars. If his chest is further away, but his hands are still connected to my legs, I'm going to look at a sleeve grip, whether it's a 2-on-1 or double sleeve control. If neither of these two options are available, he's most likely leading with his legs. So I'm going to attach to the legs, either with a De La Riva or some kind of leg entanglement entry.
So we recover in no gi our feet back to the biceps. It's a little different to the gi in that you don't really have a good upper body control that's really going to stick you to your opponent. So obviously we have the collar and the gi. Going for the head here, it's very easy for Ari to slip that. It's not really a good control. The same with the sleeves. Like, you could get a sleeve in the gi, but no gi you can go for a wrist. If you have enough time, if Ari's pressuring in against this, I might have time to actually try to control the wrist and set something up like that. But if he's a bit more like moving around, I don't really have time to commit and start trying to go like all out on a grip like that. So it's mostly going to be actually about trying to create space to attach to the leg. And so some key things with this, you really don't want to push with both at once. This is going to give Ari room to clear my legs. I also don't want to pull my knees both in too tight either, because he can kind of just slip off the biceps. So we're really putting this kind of, the outside of my foot kind of digs down into the elbow like this. And this is what gives me some tension on the bicep. And one leg's going to be bending and the other one is straightening. Now there's a hip movement you're going to want to be good at, which gives you access to the legs. Straight in front of me, I can't reach a leg like this. It's going to be very difficult. I need to move my hips. So by having one leg bent and the other straight, and then by actively curling with that outside of the foot, pressuring the bicep and extending the other leg, you can see my hips turning out to the side. Okay, this is the action we want, and it starts to open up space. Okay, and you can go for either side. So see that I've gone for just step your right leg forward and left back. So just in an obvious example like this, I could hip out this way and grab this leg, or I could grab that same lead leg by hipping out the other way. Obviously that's going to impact what sort of control I look for, whether I go for reverse De La Riva, or whether I go here, look for De La Riva, or whether you like to go foot on the hip from there and start to work into leg entanglements. Okay, but you're going to want to be constant. Your opponent's going to be stepping back as you do this as well and moving, so you're going to have to be moving as well. Occasionally, it is okay if you see a leg that's too far to reach. It can be okay to hook for a moment. I don't like to keep it inside for a long time, but sometimes for a fraction of a second I can hook, grip, and then I personally like to take my foot back out. I don't like to play too much inside leg positioning, but for a moment I might find an angle, hook, and grip onto the leg, and then I start getting into my position. Obviously, once we tie up into a De La Riva, that's kind of where this instructional stops, and you're going to have some specific content on that. Ari is a specialist on this, so hopefully he'll have something out on that soon. So quite a few times, as we mentioned before, when we pummel back, we actually look to get underneath the armpit here. Okay, so first off on this, don't worry about the ankle. Well, be aware that someone could sit back for an ankle lock, but you've got so much time to react to that it shouldn't be an issue. Okay, your other leg's in front, you're ready to kick away and turn. If he tried to threaten that, that's usually going to give you a very good chance for offense. Okay, I mean it is possible if you don't address it that they could get you, but if you're aware of it, turning a little bit either way will usually make that next to impossible to get. If you stay just straight on, that could be a problem. Okay. Now, so again, we're on the biceps, or maybe we've had a chance to pummel and we've gone right under the armpit. So here, usually with this, you want to create tension at the back of the shoulder. Okay. If I kick forward, that tries to bring Ari forward. If he can, that lets me attach to the leg. If he doesn't himself come forward, then that usually will help me spin. I lift my leg straight and I take my shoulder in, and that will help me get towards the leg anyway. Okay. If he's really brought that leg back, so we go here, he brings that leg back, I can often kind of post and turn off that and start to attach to the front leg. So again, we're still looking for some sort of leg entanglement in no-gi. It is hard to get an upper body entanglement from this, but I want you to be using that armpit, that kick upwards, to help drive your movement to turn. Okay. It really, if you're on your back, it can help you spin.
Okay, so now we're going to be looking at how we can establish control when we're in an uninitiated scenario. So if I'm on my back playing guard and my opponent is standing and neither of us have grips.
We're now looking at individual grips that we can take and what that opens up. What do those grips do? What are their pros and cons? For example, a collar grip, how does that affect your opponent's posture? What options does that give you to pummel? So we want to kind of understand from this perspective, like from an individual grip perspective, that when you take that grip, it's going to open certain things up and close off other options as well. And that's going to give you a kind of conceptual framework to focus on for when you recover. And then we can get into some specific scenarios, specific postures people take, and the individual responses we might give to that.
Looking at the pros and cons of the sleeve grip. When I have a sleeve grip, I can basically stop my opponent from closing the space between his forearm and bicep, which means it makes it easier for me to lasso my foot over the top, or pummel my foot underneath to hit the bicep. To an extent as well, I can also control where my opponent puts this hand. Okay, so sometimes I can stop him from grabbing grips, and if he happens to make a grip, I can also use the sleeve grip to strip the grip. Looking at the disadvantages of the sleeve grip, basically I cannot control anything below the forearm. So in the case of Lockie's elbow, I can't stop him from using his elbow to block the space between his elbow and his hip. Because I can't control the space between Lockie's elbow and hip, no matter how hard I'm pulling with the sleeve, means that I can't step my foot onto his hip. It's important to note that when we talk about the sleeve grip stopping us from allowing us to expose the elbow and hip space, it doesn't mean that once we actually have this space that we can't use the sleeve grip. It's more so what we're trying to say is that we can't use a sleeve grip to force open and expose this elbow hip space.
We can grip behind that elbow like this. It could be in no-gi, it could be like so, or in the gi, it's usually actually gripping the material, but blocking the back of the elbow. So what are the pros and cons of something like this? Now what this is good for is actually stopping, it's kind of the opposite to the sleeve grip. It kind of opens up the space between the elbow and the hip. It can make it hard for Ari to actually pull his elbow to his hip and close that gap. So it's going to open lots of space for my leg to start to shoot into somewhere here, somewhere between his armpit, his hip, and on top of this knee. So usually if you're getting a grip like this, you're looking to put your foot in that gap. Could be outside the hip or stepping on the hip, with grips. And then I've really opened that space. Okay, so it's good like that, but on the downside, it is actually a lot harder to pummel over the top. Ari still has a lot of freedom to move his hand and his shoulder. So if he wants to pummel my leg that's coming over, he might actually get control of it. So I wouldn't be looking for a bicep grip if I was gripping the back of the tricep. I wouldn't be looking to come over into one of these sort of grips. I'd really be looking to shoot in at the hip or past the hip, or potentially into something like a De La Riva. So some sort of lower body attack that is assisted by this elbow being open away from the hip. So in no-gi, we might use a grip at the back of the elbow, for example, with a 2-on-1. You might grip a 2-on-1 here, which has this elbow component to it. Or sometimes when your opponent is framing on your shoulders or pushing, they'll often expose their elbows and allow you to then start to shoot your feet in. In terms of the 2-on-1 grip, there is a difference if we've got like a standing opponent compared to someone who's quite low, like whether they're kneeling and so on. Okay, so we'll probably be low. If Ari's quite low, I'm tending to this hand will be with my elbow locked underneath and gripping on this angle, whereas when he was standing, I'd grip more over the top. So kind of palm facing away compared to palm towards me, like so. Okay, and it just has to do with the angle I can pull. So from here, I can pull Ari. I'm trying to pull him forward and across me in this angle that really opens up this space here. Whereas if Ari was to stand up and I tried to pull in that angle, it kind of opens me up. It opens too much space here that Ari could start to attack. So usually when he's standing, I tend to kind of pull down and across my hip, so I'm closing my elbows tight to I'm kind of closing my elbows tight here. And it makes it very hard for Ari to control me as I get my position. Whereas if he's a bit lower, I can able to keep my elbows tight as I kind of pull up and across here, and again, that starts to open up space. A grip that's kind of halfway between gripping a sleeve grip and an elbow grip is a forearm grip, where we take the material underneath the forearms here. Now, what's the purpose of this, or when is it useful? So now, often I should first say, trying to get a good sleeve grip, it takes a bit of time. If we're here, it's pretty rare for me to be trying to take a sleeve grip like this. This is usually taken more, if our feet are on the biceps and we've got a bit of time to set that up. If we're in this more open scenario here, often it's a lot quicker to just grip underneath the forearms here. Okay. Now, why am I gripping underneath? One of the main benefits of this is that it stops your opponent gripping your legs. Okay. So again, if I'm looking for the sleeve grips here, as I'm doing that, Ari can be taking control of my legs. Whereas by going underneath,
like this, I'm blocking his access to my legs. And it will work, the pros, it works in a pretty similar way to having a sleeve grip, in that I'm going to be falling back and looking to put my feet over the top, hooked in here, starting to get control and start to upgrade my grips. The downside is it's not as secure. When you get a good sleeve grip here, it's strong. If RH tries to strip this, he needs like a lot of force to be able to do that. Okay? I mean, it can be done, but it's more difficult. This grip is a lot easier to strip, often just by pulling. Okay, so it's a little easier to break. Now, I'd equate it more similarly to a sleeve grip than I would an elbow grip. It doesn't open the space between the elbow and the hip too well. If Ari wants to keep his elbows close to his hips, I can't really get at the hips with these forearm grips. I really want to be coming over the top and pummeling through, and then upgrading my grips from there.
Looking at the cross collar grip, so the most obvious positive to this is to be able to break our opponent's posture. If our opponent wants to strip this collar grip, he needs to recover his posture, and that's usually done by stepping his feet forward so that he can get his hips underneath his chest to strip the grip. If he does manage to strip the grip, or in the process of this, he's giving us the lower body. Now, one of the disadvantages to the cross collar grip is I don't really have any control over my opponent's hands at the moment, unless I obviously grab his sleeve. So it can be easier for him here to sort his hands out. Another thing to note as well, it's essentially a positive to the collar grip, is I can basically push my feet to the biceps and get a better surface to step my feet on, because I'm pulling his upper body towards my feet. So anytime I attach to my opponent's collar, I'm always looking to connect my feet onto his biceps. The next thing I'm looking at doing is securing another kind of upper body or lower body control. So I can go collar sleeve, collar ankle. As well as doing this, I'm also looking to off balance my opponent to start to set up my attacks. We're just going to look at the different foot positioning that we can use from this uninitiated position. Now, every time you place your foot somewhere, you're basically taking away an option for your opponent, but also giving your opponent an option. So right now, it's going to be really hard with my feet on the biceps. It's really hard for Lockie to pressure into me and get some kind of chest-on-chest connection here, because my feet are directly stopping him. However, it's going to be a bit easier for him to throw one of my legs to one side. He can also get underneath my legs a bit easy from here. Now, if I choose to loop my foot underneath, behind the shoulder of my opponent, it's going to be really hard for him to now start to go under my legs, especially on this side. He has to re-pummel my foot out of that spot. But now he has a chance to back out and go around my legs. Then we're going to look at the foot on the hip position. Now, this position here is the feet on the hips is only really good when you can get some kind of upper body control on your opponent, especially if you have a collar sleeve grip. When I have the feet on the hips as well as the collar sleeve, I can now use this pull mechanism as well as a push mechanism to stretch out my opponent. So if I have one foot on the hip, usually when I play this foot on the hip collar sleeve, I have the other foot on the bicep as well. I look to stretch out my opponent here to expose the space between his elbow and his knee, or the elbow and his hip. So I can get some kind of upper body submission, triangle omoplata, or even access one of his legs.
So in the advent of foot on the hip, the timing to do it is not necessarily when you've just got a sleeve grip to reach for the hip. We've talked about how that can be parried and it opens up too much space. The foot on the hip should be often established. If you've got a sleeve grip, you want to make sure you go high first, like over the shoulder, pull the arm above the line of the hip, and then you might be able to come back onto the hip. When the arm's back below the line of the hip and closing off, it's not a good idea to look for the hip. Or the other time to look for the foot on the hip would be if you've got elbow control, where you can actually permanently open that space and make sure that you've got room to go for that. Now there's one other situation here as well, which is to put the foot past the the hip. Okay, so sometimes we'll look for this. Why do that? Well, it's a little more difficult. Like Ari wants to push, let's say I don't have control here, and he wants to push my leg down. It takes a little bit longer, and I can actually invert through that if I'm going past the hip. If I go onto the hip here, you can kind of step back, push down, and my leg gets pushed between his legs. Okay, you can see how when I'm here, if he pushes down, it goes between his legs. If you shoot past the hip and he tries to push down, it won't go so much between the legs. It tends to go outside the leg, which is obviously bad. But if you've gone outside the leg and you're spinning under, this can often open up a chance to get under the leg for like a K-guard entry. So even if Ari is pushing, if I go here, he starts to push down and I invert, it becomes very difficult to push. So there's times we'll actually shoot past the hip, especially when we want to attach to something like a K-guard, as opposed to stepping on the hip itself. On the hip's more to stretch them out. Past the hip is to spin under and attach to something like a K-guard. Ari's going to talk about the De La Riva hook itself and how we're utilizing that and what the pros and cons of that are compared to, for example, stepping on the hip. I'll just talk about the arm positioning. Now, often the easiest grip to get is just the easiest grip to get on the leg is usually just gripping the outside around the heel. This is a good grip, but without any other pulling grips, often it's easy for Ari to turn and run. Okay, so if he turns, I tend to like slip that grip, I lose it. Okay, so although it's easier to get, it's not necessarily the most stable until you've got like some sort of good hook or control somewhere else. Okay, so probably the most stable in terms of the grips I can do with this arm to keep me in position would be if I get a chance to under. Okay, you can see Ari's just from this position alone, if Ari looked to turn and run away, it's a lot more attached. It's much more blocked. It doesn't have this big gap like there is between my hand when I'm holding like this. As he turns, that can strip. Okay, so often in terms of our grips we do on the leg when we're going to play some sort of outside leg position, whether that be looking for a K-guard or whether that be De La Riva, when we grip the leg, an outside grip might be first, but we're usually looking to come under, and this secures the leg a lot tighter.
So now that we've established lower body control, we're now going to look at the different leg positionings that we can use and also the pros and cons of these particular leg positions. So the first one we're going to look at is the outside De La Riva. The main purpose with the outside De La Riva is to stop our opponent from turning his knee outwards. The main reason why we want to stop our opponent turning their knee outwards, especially from outside De La Riva, is so that we can start to create an angle to start to go around our opponent and eventually expose the back. The next position we can look at is the foot on hip. Now, you'll see obviously a lot of beginners using tripod sweep variations. As you start to look at the higher level competitors, they will use the foot on the hip position to slip the knee on the inside to get underneath their opponent for leg entanglements and X-guard variations. So one of these is the K-guard position. And the idea with this is that we can stop our opponent from retreating and get our body and our hips underneath our opponent. We can also use this position to turn our opponent's knee inwards. And similar to the outside De La Riva, we're stopping our opponent from turning their knee to the outside. One of the other upper body controls that we can use with the sleeve grip is the half lasso. And as well as using the sleeve grip to pull my opponent's hand in, I'm actually also using my hip and my knee. So when I pull my knee to my chest, because of the positioning of my foot, it actually helps me pull my opponent's hand in. It makes it really hard for my opponent to pull his hand out and retreat. So this is really good for offensive purposes, transitioning between other guards, but as well, this foot on the shoulder is really important for framing. So if my opponent is trying to pressure into me for some kind of under the legs pass, I can use my half lasso to push my opponent away. Even if my opponent is starting to bullfighter, he can't bullfighter through my lasso because of the frame that I have here. Same thing with a knee cut as well. Half lasso stops my opponent from getting close enough to connect chest on chest. So it's a really important position for both framing offensive attacks and transitioning between different guards. One of the reasons why I prefer to play this variation of the lasso in comparison to the other variations is because, let's say we look at the deep lasso position, it's quite good for creating torque on our opponent's shoulder and off balancing. But now that my foot is shot all the way past the bicep, my foot is no longer able to frame. All I have now is my knee and my shin, and sometimes your opponent, if they're quite good with this position, they can actually slip their shoulder over your knee, and now you're in a really bad position because your knee and your hip is completely clear. So if we look at using the half lasso, our opponent can't look to clear this space. Once we go deep, our opponent can start to pressure in, and it's a lot harder for us to frame and make distance. Once I have my deep lasso as well, especially if my hips get turned to one side, it can be quite hard for me to take my lasso out and go back to a shallow lasso. Whereas with the shallow lasso position, I have the freedom of shooting my foot shallow or deep. I can always go back to other guards and connect my guard game, as well as keeping my opponent at bay.
Now we're going to be looking at whether we should be sitting up or supine, laying on our back to establish control. When I'm sitting up, it's a lot easier for me to be more aggressive and offensive in terms of attacking and making a grip. Anytime I can grab the upper body, whether it's a collar grip, cross collar grip, one of the sleeves, I can fall to my back to establish a guard. If I can latch onto a leg, I can also fall to my back to establish a guard. When I'm laying on my back, I'm basically going to be a lot more reactive, kind of like it's going to be more of a counter-fighting scenario. So my opponent is going to be making grips. I have to react by initially being defensive, getting good foot positioning, then looking to attach to either the upper body or to the lower body. I don't want to be sitting up when my opponent has some kind of control of me. So if my opponent has pan grips, I'm looking to fall back into the supine position so that I can pummel my feet and then establish control. So in summary, make sure to be sitting up so that you can make your grips. And once you make your grips, fall back onto your shoulders so that you can start to set up a guard. If your opponent has control on you, make sure that you're laying on your back so that you can recover your foot positioning and then establish a guard.
Now, what's going to determine where you grip first is pretty simple. It's what's available. Okay, so and that's going to depend on your opponent's posture. If they're tall and standing like this, their upper body is far away, you're certainly going to be looking to attach to a leg. If, especially in the gi, but even no gi, that the first control you're going to get against someone who's low and leading with their head and their arms is almost always going to be somewhere on the upper body, and then working to, if you lack lower body guards, you'll have to work from there to start to isolate the lower body.
One thing I want to look at now and quickly address is the pathway that our foot is making when we're pulling guard. So a common thing that people do, it's not the most ideal thing you want to be doing either, is shooting your foot in one direct pathway to the hip or the bicep without some kind of strong control where we can separate and create the space. So we can separate our opponent's elbow from their hip and knee. So as I go to shoot my foot to the hip, I'm actually exposing myself to a pass. As I go to shoot my foot to my hip, my opponent can pin one leg to the floor and start to staple his leg over my leg. You can also be at risk of other passes like bullfighter passes as well. So more commonly, especially with the more dexterous guard players, you'll see that whenever they pull guard, they don't bring their foot into this straight pathway. They don't go in one plane. They first circle to the outside, and then they come over the top, and then they have the option of going to the shoulder, bicep, or the hip. So with this exact same example that I showed previously, instead of going straight for the hip or bicep, I'm going to fall to my side, and I'm going to bring my leg up
and to the shoulder. And now from here, I'm in a better spot to pummel my feet.
So the issue with the first type of guard pull was that I'm basically giving my opponent the ability to reach for my leg. So again, with this other approach, I'm taking away his ability to reach for my leg because I'm pummeling it quite far away from him and over the top.
A key thing to be thinking about in terms of like, we're in this position where no one has grips on each other yet. One of the main things you don't want to allow your opponent to grip is your legs, because that's really our strongest weapon to push away. So obviously there are some upper body controls you don't want them to get, but generally if Ari's reaching for my upper body, it allows me to counter grip as well, and that can let me start to control. Whereas if he's going for my legs and I allow him to control my legs, grab my legs here, it can be a lot more difficult to actually establish control here, because it's all going to be upper body frames keeping distance. It's much worse scenario for me if I let him grab my legs, and that could be if I'm seated or if I'm or if I'm on my back. If I allow him to control my legs, this is going to be generally a bad thing. So how do we go about avoiding that? Well, the posture that I have myself here when I'm seated is I tend to want to bring my elbows forward and really have my arms like protecting my legs. Okay, so like if I'm here, my arms are covering the legs, I'm ready to fight this grip. I'm not reaching up here where I give a big gap for Ari to go for my legs first. Okay, so we want to put our elbows in front, pretty much in front of our shins here, blocking that particular entry, and then we can start to attack from there. If you're on your back, again, similar thing. I don't want to have my legs extended where that's going to be the first grip that will occur. Okay, you need go back. If I'm on my back, I need my feet close and I need them to be moving so that when Ari's trying to reach for that, it might allow me to start to control his arms. Okay, so you want to have your arms in range to intercept and grip fight for any grip they're trying to take on your leg. One additional thing, which is important for this as well, is if Ari is front on with me and I'm pummeling my legs like this, it's still actually the furthest away he can be from my arms to get a grip here. If I give a little angle and I play more from here, you can see I have a much better ability to engage my arms secondary to my legs. So if I'm working here and looking for grips, it tends to be a little easier to reach for the upper body or potentially to the lower body than if I am front on trying to pummel my legs to get this.
So the next thing we're going to be looking at is the principle of setting up a strong defensive structure prior to going onto the offense. So this is a very common mistake that I see a lot of people make when they're playing guard. So a perfect example of this
Is, let's say my opponent has pants grips and I have sleeve grips. Let's say my goal is to put my opponent into, say, a spider guard, so 2 feet on the biceps, and to attack from there. If my opponent starts to bullfighter from here, and I haven't actually set my feet on the biceps, he's just going to pass straight away, and I'm not going to be able to frame because my hands are committed to the sleeves. I have no frames. Okay? All I have is basically some kind of pulling force, okay, to pull my opponent towards me, but I have no frame or any structure to push my opponent away, especially if both my hands are committed to the grips. So it's much safer to have our hands free, ready to frame, and then prioritizing getting our feet to the biceps first. Now, in case my opponent starts to try and pressure into me, I can push him away with my frames because I have my feet on the biceps and my hands ready and not committed to the grips. Then when I'm ready to establish a guard, then I'm going to look to make my grips. So always make sure when we're attacking and trying to establish a guard, we look at setting up a frame, a defensive structure, a structure where we can push our opponent away to keep them at bay and manage the distance before looking at getting some kind of structure to pull our opponent towards us.
So another example that commonly happens is trying to set up some kind of submission without having our frames set up. So for example, I go collar sleeve and I look to shoot a triangle straight away without framing my opponent away first. As I start to shoot my legs up, my opponent can attack a guard pass straight away. Whereas what would be a better thing to do is to first establish our feet onto the hips or shoulder and then look to pull our opponent through into some kind of upper body submission.
This idea of establishing defensive structure before offense can be seen in a lot of areas in grappling. I'm just going to give you an example in stand-up because I think it's a great way to exemplify it. But usually, from a wrestling point of view, one of the first things that people will do is look for a shoulder post. Okay? If you post on the shoulder, it immediately blocks your opponent from attacking you, and it allows you then to start to find your range and set up your own attacks. Okay, so it's very rarely that you want to come in and try to like pull or arm drag without first just finding your range, having a block, and then secondary you can have something that starts to attack from there. Another concept or a very common mistake that I see people doing here is putting their feet on the hips without having good control of posture and having the sleeve above the line of the hip. So if Ari's here, I quite often see, especially people who are new, like putting feet here. I'm just giving Ari a leg to control. Okay, there's no real benefit of that unless I've tied him up. Okay, it is different if I'm actually holding his leg, then this can actually be okay. Or if I've got upper body control. So generally, the time to put the foot on the hip is if I control the same, or because I have to do the same side, but if I control the arm and I have it beyond the line of my hip here. Okay, now if I put foot on the hip, this can really stretch out and be an effective guard. Okay, if I go foot on the hip, but Ari's hand and elbow and everything is back beyond the line of my hip, I don't really feel like I am controlling him here. And in fact, he's probably going to clear that and start to make it a lot worse for me. Okay, so just pay attention to that rule when you are actually pulling guard. If you want to play any sort of guard that attacks from the foot off the hip, we're going to want to make sure that we get the hand up and then we can attach to the hip to fight from there.
So essentially what our end goal with this stage of our guard retention is to establish points of control where we can both pull our opponent in if need be and also push our opponent away to manage distance. So examples of these positions can be, say, the collar sleeve, what I have right now. Collar sleeve with half lasso, outside De La Hiva, key guard, spider guard variations. So if we look at these examples we've given so far, the spider half lasso is a perfect example. My opponent can't progress further into me because of my frames. I have one foot on the bicep or one foot on the shoulder, so I can always push him away. And he can't retreat because I'm attached to his sleeves. I can move my hips to track his movement. Same thing with the lasso position as well. Outside De La Hiva, my opponent can't progress forwards because of my foot on the shoulder. If he clears the foot on the shoulder, I still have my knee shield here as well, so my opponent still can't progress forwards into me. If he tries to retreat away, my grip on his ankle is stopping this from happening.
All right, so now we're going to go through a few different scenarios, postures from the person on top really, and how the person on bottom who's playing guard should be looking to establish and control to the point where they get to a specific control of their opponent. So those postures we're going to look at are, we're going to have someone so Ari is seated and your opponent is leaning forward like this. We're going to cover if your opponent is standing up. We'll cover a combat base where the person tends to be up on one foot with one knee here and the other knee down on the ground. And we'll also cover how to deal with someone in the kneeling position. We'll have a look at these gi and no gi. The last one we will cover is also from the lying down position. So if you're lying down on your back, what we're looking to do to actually establish control here, which we already covered a bit, so it'll be quite brief on that. In this, Ari is going to cover what we would do in the gi, and I'm going to cover how we would approach the same scenario in no gi.
So now we're going to be looking at the various postures that the guard passer can take and how we can look to establish control. So if my opponent is really upright, it's going to be really hard for me to attach to the sleeves and to actually pull a proper guard. Let's say, for example, I get to my sleeves and Lockie stays really upright with his chest in line or behind with his hips. When I go to put in a spider guard, I actually can't get my foot onto the bicep or shoulder. So I'm much better off attaching to the lower body. So one thing we can look to do is we can look to reach across and cup the back of our knee. And we're actually going to hang off at the back of our opponent's knee. What I'm looking to do is attach to a De La Riva guard. So I'm going to fall to my left shoulder. And then I'm going to look to switch to my left hand, cupping the ankle, so that I can set my De La Riva guard. My other leg is going to be free here, and I'm looking to see what my opponent is going to do next. So if my opponent starts to hinge at his hips to engage with me to clear my hook, I can look to catch a cross collar grip, and then I can also look to swim my foot onto the bicep or to hook behind his ribs and connect like a high knee shield. So I'm ready to attack from here. As well as the De La Riva guard, we can also look at going to some X guard variations. So once I start to attach to my opponent's knee and cut and fall to my shoulder, instead of going straight to the De La Riva guard, I can look at connecting my foot to his hip. Because he's upright, he's giving me this space. And then I'm going to be looking to attach my far hook to his far leg so that I can start to swim underneath for a X guard.
Here I tried to mix it up a bit, pass with quite a tall posture, just so Ari has to try to go for my legs instead of my upper body first. And then as he's focused on that, I try to switch back down towards the legs. So I think he might have managed to grab my sleeve anyway. So I've gone for it. Actually, I've grabbed his legs here. And then Ari's immediately recognized that, fallen to his back as he should, and pummeled his feet in. In doing so, he managed to get a good spider guard hook, extend me out to the side, and off balance me into a De La Riva position.
In no-gi, against a tall standing opponent, it's probably not really too different to how you would approach it in the gi, to be honest. Maybe some subtle things that I might do a little different to Ari. Sometimes, again, just because I'm front on, sometimes I'll kind of, for a moment, just hook the leg on the inside for a moment. Sometimes just to get a grip on the leg. Okay. So that's one thing. Occasionally I'll do that because sometimes I find if I reach and I don't have a hook, he can step off. So if we're here, I'll often just like hook for a moment, but then I want to take that leg to the outside again. Because we're playing for a lot from our outside leg position. Okay. Another thing with this that I do think is important is don't give up your structure to reach for the leg. So it can be dangerous if you kind of like go here and give this space and then try to come through. So if you look at how I do it, I try to keep my knee close to I'll be hooking, I fall, and you can see if you look here, I'll be hooking and I fall, but I try to put my knee almost on my shoulder here. There's no gap for when I want to come through and actually get into position to attack. And then, just similar to as Ari said, if he had given me a good angle, he'd step back, I'd probably attach to a good De La Riva and work my attacks from there. If he's more centered, I might try to step in the front, shoot underneath, and start getting to a leg entangle.
here you have an example of reaching for the ankle as the initial grip. So you can see I reach for the ankle, and then I'm going to try to shoot. So I want to close, I've kind of opened up a little bit of space. I want to close that off by bringing my legs over the top. But you can see I kind of missed. I reached and I don't really stick well to the leg. So I come back up, framing I'm on the defense now, so I need to frame the shoulders so that I don't get passed immediately. So again, if you're not in good offense, I was able to actually grip the ankle again, but miss it. So I'm back into frames as I sit up. Okay, so Ari's backed away enough that I can sit up, and then this time I managed to grip that, I say ankle, just above the ankle, and you can see I bring my legs over the top into De La Riva. I talked about underhook grips, but you can also get a deep overhook of the ankle, and that's usually enough to stop them being able to run away immediately. And a similar thing here. Again, Ari tends to have a reasonably tall posture when standing. It's going to be very hard to get good upper body control, so I'm looking to attach to the legs if possible. So what you might look at there first is I use that little hook just for a moment to stop Ari from stepping away, and that's enough to get my hand to catch the ankle. I only just get it. This is one where I kind of don't keep hold of it, but I kind of manage to stay underneath enough that I end up with an attachment to the leg. So I'm attached here, and then Ari kicks off that. But I've managed to scoot underneath enough that both feet can hook. This is a little bit dangerous actually because both feet have dropped low. It's better to have one high while you're reaching for these sort of things. And then just because of those feet hooking, I've managed to get back onto the ankle again. And then he steps off, but I manage some level of an entanglement.
If my opponent is standing with his hips hinged, it usually means that his lower body is inaccessible. So if he's really bringing his upper body forward and his feet back, it can be quite hard for me to reach for a leg, and it might also be quite dangerous for me to reach for a leg because I'm overextended. So I'm going to look to attach to the upper body. The grips that I'm looking to make is some kind of upper body grip on the collar for posture control, and a sleeve grip. Doesn't mean you have to always grab the collar. Sometimes you can go 2-on-1 sleeve grip or a double sleeve grip. As well, one thing to note as well, sometimes it can be really hard to open up your opponent's sleeves to get a perfect sleeve grip. You might not have enough time. So the best thing for you to do is to just reach and basically grab whatever material you can below the elbow, and this can make it easier too. So first thing I like to do is if I go same side collar, I make sure my elbow is quite tucked in. I don't want to be overextending because some people like to jump for flying submissions here, like flying arm bars and flying triangles. So I'm always really aware of that. And basically, I want to be very conscious of how I fall. If I don't control the sleeve when I fall, it can be quite risky. If I just aim to shoot straight for my opponent's hip or bicep, he can actually start to pin my leg, and now I'm actually in quite a bad position. So sometimes what I will look to do is, as I fall to one side, I'll actually kind of pummel my leg, so I'll go from a low arc to a high arc as I'm falling to my side. I start to pull, and I start to loop my leg and shoot it through to behind the tricep, and my other leg I'm looking to hit at the shoulder. From here, I've got a strong upper body control, and now I can attach to the sleeve, and I can swap between the various collar sleeve and spider guard variations from here. If I can get the grips on the forearms, I'm looking to usually, again, shoot a foot to the bicep, and the other foot I'm looking to shoot in for a half lasso. Sometimes you can go double half lasso, so 2 feet on the shoulders like so, and then you can look to re-pummel your feet. The other thing I like to do from here against this kind of posture is a 2-on-1 grip. Now again, it can be quite hard to get this really nice sleeve grip where you kind of tuck the guy's sleeve over like this. So sometimes what I will get is just a grip on the outside of the forearm and a grip on the wrist like so. And I feel like I can stay quite attached to my opponent from here. I'm going to start to slide my hips in, and then I'm going to start to throw one half lasso in, and my other leg I keep high so I can pummel it. So let's move a bit closer to. So I pull in, and I'm going to fall to one side, getting my half lasso and getting this other leg ready to pummel to the shoulder or bicep.
With this one, I try to jump the gun and get a control of Ari's legs as as my first grip. And notice immediately, because of that, Ari's straight onto frames. He's got 2 frames on my shoulder. So now whenever I try to go around the legs, it's not going to have a high percentage of success so long as he falls to his back, which should be his next movement. There we are. He falls to his back. One hand is framing, the other one's supporting his hip, and it looks like he's trying to high pummel over the top. Yes, there we are. And you can see he's got that high pummel in. Once he has his high pummel, 2 feet on the biceps, he's starting to gain more and more control. Again, double sleeve, and ends up with good control with feet on the biceps. Here you can see an example of Ari going for the collar grip. So I'm trying to find an avenue to attach to his legs to pass around, and Ari will grip just immediately to a collar. And then from that, his second hand frames. So obviously he's got one collar grip, but that might not be particularly strong. So having a second hand there to frame my shoulder. Now he's going to allow his legs to shoot over the top. Or at least one. He tried to shoot under. The other one's gone over the top. And that will be enough to gain control. So we talked about the feet not both coming up underneath, because if I had 2 grips like this, he would be in trouble. But because this one leg at least is coming over, often it's 2 over, that's allowed him to then get 2 feet in the biceps now, and he's got control.
In no-gi, against an opponent that's leaning forward in the standing position and we're seated, again, we don't want our opponent to control our legs. One good thing is it's a little harder for them to get good control on our legs compared to in the gi, just because they can't just grab the pants. So it's a less stable control they can get. But the bad thing for me is I can't just grip a collar here and be attached. And I can't just grab the head and be attached very well either. Okay, you can play with the head positioning, and if it's too low, you can try to attack the head, but if it's up a little bit, it's going to be very hard to attack that. So I will look for the arm, but it's going to be more a 2-on-1. A single hand grip isn't going to last very long. Very easy for Ari to break through that. You really have to try to get 2 hands on the one. And I like a very similar approach to Ari, actually, in that we want to be circling our feet over the top. It's going to be very dangerous to in a scenario like this, to start trying to attack the legs. Even if you like inside leg positioning, it's going to be very dangerous coming in like this. You're going to open up a lot of space, okay? And the same thing goes for outside leg positioning. So we need to control that upper body first and then get to the legs. So 2-on-1 is good. Sometimes that can be 2 on the wrist. Sometimes that can be 1 at the elbow. I quite like the wrist for what I'm going to do here though, okay? So I'm going to shoot my legs over, falling on the same side as that 2-on-1. And my aim is really for my outside leg to actually come underneath the armpit. If I stay here, I find with the 2-on-1 here, it's kind of hard to get an angle to attach to the legs. And again, it's very difficult to attack upper body submissions from here. So I really don't I don't feel like I have something to stop him backing away. So you run away, all right? I don't have something to stop that unless I can hook that armpit. So we're here. We're looking maybe two wrists at once, but when I want to pull, it often goes to the two on. Okay. I want to go here and I want to hook behind this armpit. Now you back away, Ari, run backwards. I can follow and stay attached. Okay, this hook behind the armpit, kicking up, curling back, like kind of kicking up and pulling my knee to my chest at the same time. Okay, and then I can start to attach to a leg. Okay, whichever side my hips go, as we mentioned before, my hips can move out. I can attach to a leg, or my hips can move in. Once I've started to open this space, it's often a great time to start creating entries for the K-guard. So my foot on the outside, knee going to the inside, and attaching to the leg. You can check out my leg lock anthology for more on K-guard entries. So that approach was for when we're kind of playing at this wrist level of hand fighting. So Ari's reaching for me and I'm going like this. If he's more like reaching for my shoulder, sometimes he wants to push me back or use this to start to set up the pass. If I can get to the back of the elbows, this again is great because it stops. If Ari wants to move away now, I can follow. Okay, it lets me attach. But it's a similar sort of thing. You can't wait here because I'm now got two pulling grips and no frames. I need to hip out of my foot coming across the hip here. Okay, so now he can't. If you look here, by doing this, he's in between my legs and I've got his arms as well. There's no immediate, like if he comes forward at me, it's actually not to his benefit. Okay, so it's one time where it's actually okay to not have frames when I've actually got like a nice wide gap where he can't, we're driving forward and puts him between my legs and into the close guard. Okay, so that is one scenario where you can do, kind of break that rule. But if Ari starts reaching towards my shoulders, double tricep, stops him retracting, hips out, and I usually look to put my foot across the hip. I'll show that on the other side, just see. We're here, I get my hips out, and I start going here, okay? And then, again, you're gonna want to look to tie up to the leg, usually to a K-guard from here. I either bring my knee inside, under the armpit, or over the top, under the armpit, and starting to spin underneath to attach to a leg.
Here you can see an example from a uninitiated position. Ari's engaging in a little bit more of a hand fight, so I'm able to get control, two hands on the wrist. And then from here, because I'm controlling the wrist, I do have to worry about, holding one hand is good, but you still have to watch your opponent trying to run around and get angles on you here. So I want to get my legs engaged. So I fall back and engage my legs here. Now, just because I'm holding one wrist, there is still, potential for poor positioning to occur. Ari's starting to come under the leg, so I'm going to try to put a little knee shield over the top of that. There we are. Okay, so the knee shield blocks that. So I've now got a good frame here, but I still haven't got good attachment yet to the legs. It becomes a little bit of a scramble for positioning and a little bit of an invert trying to reset till eventually I grip the ankle. So I've gone from wrist, I've now got the ankle, and I'm starting to shoot the De La Riva hook in.
Now we're going to look at our options of establishing control against an opponent that is in the combat base. In regards to the controls that we take against an opponent playing combat base, we are basically looking at which knee is up and therefore which arm is exposed. We're looking at how much space there is between the foot of the knee that is up, how much space is between this heel and the hips. And we're also looking at whether we're lying down, so our positioning, if we're lying or sitting up. We're also looking at how our opponent is playing from a broader perspective of being offensive or defensive. So if our opponent is not really trying to attack and he's just trying to strip grips and stay really balled up, as opposed to our opponent who's looking at pummeling the legs and then being aggressive with his guard passes. As a general rule of thumb, if my opponent's right knee is up, it's going to be a lot easier for me to attach myself to the opposite side of his body. So I can look at getting a collar sleeve or a sleeve grip on the opposite side to the knee that is up. So from this seated scenario here, because his right knee is up, I'm going to look to shoot my foot towards his left bicep. If his elbow is open, I might look at shooting my foot all the way through behind the armpit. And now I'm in a potential position to attack an omoplata. If my opponent has this elbow closed, I can't shoot my foot through, so I'm going to look to shoot my foot to the bicep. In terms of this arm here, you can attach to this arm, especially if it's sitting on the inside of the knee. You can shoot your foot to the bicep, or you can lasso your foot over the top. If I'm on my back and I don't have the option to sit up, maybe my opponent is controlling my feet quite nicely, I'm going to look at attaching to the collar. So I'm going to look at taking a cross collar grip. And now from here, this is where I look to try and off balance my opponent for De La Riva entry. So if I can punch my opponent away with my collar grip and create enough space between his heel and his hip, I can look to attack my De La Riva entry. If I don't do this though, if I just try and put my De La Riva hook in now, I'm simply unable to because the space is taken up. So from here, I'm looking at punching my opponent away, picking up his heel to extend his knee, and then put my De La Riva hook through. If my opponent is very conscious of my De La Riva hook, and as I go to make my hook, he tries to fold his shin over my knee, I can use my off balance that we covered earlier in the through the leg section against the near side knee through. Right, off balance him to the far side, extend his knee, and then put my De La Riva hook in. Now, if you're on your back and your opponent is not letting you make any grips and he's being quite defensive, this is where we can look at shin on shin variations. You can enter this shin on shin while you're on your back, or you can sit up as well. So what I'm looking at doing is from the shin on shin entry, I'm trying to off balance my opponent away from this leg so that I can take weight off of this leg, and then I can start to flick this leg up and pull his leg in to a single leg X variation. So again, if my opponent is not letting me make grips and he's playing very defensive, every time I reach for a grip, he strips the grip away. If I try and take a sleeve grip, he strips it away. I'm going to start to sit up, shoot to the same side collar, off balance him so that this leg is light, and then pick this leg up for a single leg X. Now we can also use this entry when we have our foot on the bicep. So earlier before I spoke about how anytime our opponent steps his right knee up, we want to look at stepping on the left bicep. So I can also use this foot on the bicep to off balance and enter shin on shin to go to my X guard. So in summary, right knee up, attached to the left arm. If we're on our back and our opponent isn't letting us attach to the sleeves, shoot for the collar grip and enter for your De La Riva. Try and off balance to take weight off this leg so you can stretch out his knee and put your hook in. If your opponent tries to Go near side knee through. Off balance to the other side. Put your De La Riva hook in. If your opponent is not letting you make any grips, you're looking at sitting up, off balancing, and going to X guard from the shin on shin entry. Then we also have, using our foot on the bicep, the spider guard shin on shin entry to go to our single leg kicks.
So now we're going through combat base in Nogi. I should say, as soon as someone drops to a knee, their mobility drops dramatically. So obviously there's one knee down, and then when they go down to two knees, they get even less mobile again. So you're going to have less worry about your opponent suddenly exploding around your guard, but it tends to be when someone's on their knee, as we're discussing, the space that they give you here between their shoulders and their hips is often very well protected, and that's usually what we're trying to work in towards. Or as a general strategy, if they close that space so much, they're often like so in that you can circle around and start going, and that forces them to open up, as you'll see. For me, I really just look for, I want to do K-guard. Yeah. I want to get an entry into K-guard. That's my first thing I'm going to try to do. And kind of like what Ari said, this side that's a lot more open, this side's kind of closed off, the elbow is locked in, so I want to open up this side and attack this side. Okay, so usually what I do, I want to control that wrist or hand, and it's very hard for Ari, because he's up, or even if he's dropped down lower, it's very hard for him to control all of this space. So just by holding this arm, I can usually shoot my foot out, down, across the hip here. My outside foot, just want to turn to face the camera a little. Yep, good. My outside foot, I'm going to start feeding toes first through here, and then I've got a chance to reach to the leg and enter K-guard. Okay, so I'll work around the angle to that once more. Ari's up. I'm going to work for this grip on my side, because he's going to hold my leg, right? He's going to be trying to pummel. I can be pummeling against that and working to here, foot past the hip. Keep hold of the wrist as you reach to the leg, and we can enter K-guard. Okay. So how can he defend that? He can keep, like I'm trying to get around this corner, he can keep kind of turning that way. So we go again. I get this grip, I go here, and Ari keeps turning that way, making that difficult. Okay, what's he opening up? De La Riva. The more he puts this knee this way, making it difficult to go here, the more he's opening up a good De La Riva hook going the other way. Okay, so then I can start to work and attach the De La Riva from there. Okay, so once more. But here, I'm pummeling with this, I start going for K-guard, Ari blocks, I swing the pendulum this leg, make my De La Riva hook, and then it depends where you want to enter from the De La Riva.
So now we're going to be looking at the kneeling position. So the kneeling position,
it's not really the most threatening posture that our opponent can take. It's quite hard for our opponent to pass guard in this particular posture, and his mobility is quite limited here. He's not going to be on his toes running around your guard. The one issue with this position, though, is it's really hard to actually open your opponent up, especially if they're really balling up like so. So what we're going to look at from here is basically, it's going to be completely reaction based. So if my opponent is looking to grab my upper body, because he's opening this space, I can look to step on his hip. If my opponent lets me extract this elbow from his hip, I can also do the same thing, or I can look to swim my foot to the bicep as I pull my guard. If my opponent is really balled up like this, I can't go to the inside, so when I look to pull guard, I'm going to look to lasso my legs over the top, like so.
Going to be covering the kneeling position. Now, you could probably do a whole series on this. There's a whole bunch of options you've got from here, especially if you play inside positioning. But there's things like arm drags, even with your feet on the outside, so they're not going in between the legs. You can arm drag, head snap, all those sorts of things. But we're going to focus on this outside leg positioning that we've covered earlier, and that's going to mean I want to try to get my feet to the outside. So how do I approach that? I tend to want to, if I've got a kneeling opponent, I want to get the 2-on-1, and I want to actually expose this corner here. I want to actually have this whole thigh essentially here exposed. So if Ari's got his arm here, this is going to block, I'll put it like a thigh, yeah. It's going to block my leg unless I can shoot underneath it, which can be an option. Sometimes they have their arm wide enough that I can actually shoot through. If I can do that, that's an immediate invert into a K guard entry. Okay. If the gap here is not available, so I can't get my foot in through here, then often by getting a 2-on-1 and trying to pull the arm across, we'll open that gap. Okay. So it tends to be, if I pull more towards me, he can sometimes block my leg from entering. But if I tend to pull across, move my hip, as I pull across, I actually put this is one time my hip escaped, sorry Ari. My foot goes to the ground and I hip out to get that foot across the hip, because I need my knee on the inside and foot on the outside. Okay. If you just shoot your leg straight in, sometimes your knee will end up on the outside. That's no good for K guard, and actually I can get this leg squashed. So making space by moving out this way. So I'm here, I get 2-on-1, foot goes out to the side, I move my hip out, here we are, pulling the arm up and across, see that space? Here, okay. And again, I want to get under this leg. Same thing applies like earlier. If I can't get under the leg, I'm going to start pummeling under the armpit to either pull my hips in and then get a chance to roll under, or to pull Ari forward and start getting a chance to get under the leg. We talked about mostly, we want to sit up if there's no grips, but sometimes you get stuck on your back and there's no grips. Like we covered what to do when the feet are in the biceps before, and we have covered some of the ideas of leg pummeling here. But just because there's no grips, for example, right now, just because there's no grips, it doesn't mean I should sit up right now, because it's actually very dangerous to sit up. In fact, that's how I got caught. But in ADCC, it gets caught. But as we disengaged, I went to sit up, but actually it was the wrong time to do that. And if I sit up, if you watch here, when I go from on my back to sitting up, it's often easy to start to pummel and undo. I don't have good defensive structure in that transition. Okay, so
going from your back to sitting up is not something you just do no matter what. You have to do it at the right time. It has to be that I was trying to pummel my legs and maybe Ari's backed away for a moment. Okay, now I can get up and I scoot backwards. And now I'm in good position. Okay, so we're here, there's enough space. Okay, I get up, I still have my frames ready, scoot back. Okay, now I can play from the seated position. But don't do, we're not here and I don't go forward and that's where I can actually get caught in something very bad, like a deep underhook from there. So just keep that in mind. If you are on your back then and your opponent is close, you need to have ability to fight from here. So as we said, keeping your feet back, circling your feet, and trying to get a hold of lapels. If not, we're tending to try to grip onto the leg. So kind of whatever's available. And if we can grip the leg, we can start to get our De La Riva and so on, or potentially reverse De La Riva or whatever kind of guard you look for there, right? And we also talked about a little bit, having a slight angle, being a little easier to reach with your hands to get grips, and also maybe a little better plane for your legs to be pummeling from here. Okay, so again, I'm in the scenario where I don't have any controls. Maybe just back away for a second. But Ari's close enough that I'm worried about that. I'll find my angle. I'm here. I might be looking to hook, grip the ankle, come in for my De La Riva. Or if he backs away, sitting up and recovering back to a seated guard. If he leans forward and starts trying to attach to my legs, that often gives me a chance to control the upper body. Right? In no-gi, that might be for a moment looking for a 2-on-1, pummeling in, and then eventually looking to attach to a leg.
You get to see my strategy here from playing on my back position. And, again, I feel like you do have to spin quite a bit. It's going to be very hard to attach to anything meaningful on your back with your opponent in front of you, just because you can't really reach a good upper body control that's too meaningful. I want to get to the legs. So you'll see me kind of spinning and trying to reach for a leg. There we are. I missed that one. But turning. And often, as you kind of spin right through, you spin through the north-south position. So here we do with the turtle shell spin. There we are. That's actually allowed me to reach under a leg and hook an entry into what will be K-guard. There'll be a little scramble that comes after that. But you can see here, as you go around, I've underhooked the leg. And this is enough now. Because of me spinning my hips back to face Ari, I should have a good chance at attaching in onto the hip. Ari does a great job of controlling my far leg, so I have to kind of do a few little adjustments. For example, using my far leg to step on the hip to recover my inside leg again. Or I try to spin back through into close guard and then back with my original leg into K guard. Here you can see an example of Ari when he's playing on his back, trying to establish grips. And in this, his strategy is really, use his guard retention. And as I start trying to control his legs, that also gives him a chance to control my arms. So by having good leg placement and making it very difficult for me, since he's tried to reach my grip here, I'm kind of letting go when I feel like my chance doesn't work. I'm trying to control his legs without him getting control on me. But it's very hard to do because he's so good at placing his legs in front. So now in me gripping his ankle, he's got my sleeve, and that's actually going to be my undoing and losing this particular exchange. Now he's got the sleeve, he's peeled that, so he's now got control of that without me holding the leg. 2 hands on the one, and the other foot's on the inside of the forearm, so he's controlling that space. And we end up in essentially De La Riva. Another example from the lying down position, and you can see Ari already looking for grips. And eventually well, not eventually, he's quite soon going to get a sleeve grip again. I'm going to start trying to go somewhat under the legs, but his leg positioning doesn't allow that to happen. So I'm in this kind of, I got some pressure, like it's somewhat of a stack pressure, but it's not any immediate danger for Ari because he's got this bicep ride position. That's going to allow him to control 2 sleeves. And once he has the second sleeve, he's able to, when he recovers, he's got really good control of my upper body. So now when he pummels his left foot back here, that's going to put me in bad position. There we go. So now he's got both of my arms, feet on the bicep, and the other foot hooked under the armpit.